Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Talking Points. I'm Matthew with my co-host Matt. Uh, in today's episode, we're going to just have a general discussion about Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. We touched uh, on those two candidates briefly in a previous episode, but I had at least I have more that I want to talk about involving those candidates, and I think my friend here also would, like to hear what I have to say and bounce off of that. And if we have time, we'll discuss patriotism, but we might not. So, and I also have a list full of notes, so hopefully I don't ramble on too much. So, as everyone knows, of course, Joe Biden is the candidate for the Democratic Party in 2020. Bernie Sanders was running in the primary, and his name will still be on on the ballot for the state's primary. He's just not running anymore. And I think Tulsi Gabbard, I want to say her name's also on the ballot list, if I remember correctly. So I kind of wanted to talk some about where I thought Bernie Sanders, what he did right and what he did wrong. And I also wanted to kind of just touch on, why I support Bernie Sanders overall, since there are some substantial areas that I disagree with him on. So first off, I just want to say, I want to talk about why Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden. What is it about Bernie Sanders that makes me say, "Oh, I'll vote for him," and what makes me skeptical of Joe Biden? Because you can make the argument that, oh, well, they're both Democrats. There is some overlap between the two. Why are you picking and choosing? Why would you not just say, oh, well, Biden's the candidate, therefore, go Biden? And the reason really is just, if you go issue by issue, I just agree with Bernie far more than I agree with Biden. Now, obviously, as I say, there is overlap, and compared. And I'm not going to say that Biden and Trump are equally evil. I think in terms of the environment, Biden is better. In terms of his relationship to the courts, I think he's better. His foreign policy would be a little better. So, I mean, there are reasons to say, oh, well, Biden's better than Trump. But Bernie is far better than Biden, in my view, because Bernie doesn't take money from Wall Street. Biden does. Bernie isn't for American interventionism. Biden is. Biden is not for Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, legalizing marijuana, getting money out of politics. Bernie is. And, those issues are important enough to me to say, okay, well, I would vastly prefer Bernie over Biden. Is that a good place to start?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I thought you might. Well, so I think last time we discussed this, we spent most of the time talking about just the general idea that Bernie Sanders is not an establishment candidate, unlike Joe Biden. And we talked about a lot of factors that play into that and how anti-establishment Bernie really is. And right now, you just kind of ran through some issues and you pointed out how Joe Biden isn't really a progressive. He's more of a, I guess he's a typical Democrat. He's a Democrat of the era before Bernie Sanders. So he's a 2012 or 2016 Democrat. He's essentially running on a continuation of Barack Obama. And he's not trying to do anything radical or transformative. And you're essentially saying, I'd take the transformative candidate. I'd take the candidate who was willing to support a $1 trillion stimulus plan that is the Green New Deal, or is willing to actually put in some extremely progressive judges into the Supreme Court and will not. You don't think they'll back out? Now, one of my qualms with that position is, in terms of practice, I'm not sure if it would actually make a difference, because you have to consider that the president, to some extent, they can lead from the bully pulpit, but to some extent, they sign whatever's put in front of them. I would suspect that Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders would all be willing to sign in pretty much the same legislation. And that, I guess that's only excluding really foreign policy. But say the Green New Deal was put in front of Barack Obama, if he had a third term, he would sign it in a heartbeat. And I don't think Joe Biden would, I don't think he'd veto a Green New Deal if it got to his desk. So I guess the question is, how much power does the president have in shaping the agenda? Now, with Donald Trump, he's obviously had a lot of power shaping the agenda. But I think that's been an anomaly to some extent, because Donald Trump was like such a polarizing figure that they didn't want to upset him. He would call out people, so people were kind of not sure what to do unless Trump gave them the go-ahead ahead of time. If somebody like Biden, who has essentially no charisma and isn't going to be a full-on leader, he's going to do whatever the House of Representatives, or if there were Democrats in the House and Senate, he would do kind of whatever they would signal to him is right to do. So in practice, aside from foreign policy, I don't know if Biden would actually be that different than Bernie Sanders as a president, if that makes sense. That's kind of what I think, or my instincts. Do you have thoughts on that?
Not only would there be difference in foreign policy, I would say there would also be difference in terms of their economic outlook. Whether you agree with it or not, Bernie was against TPP. He's against outsourcing jobs, and Biden is for TPP and for outsourcing jobs, even if he doesn't say that. And I think if you put the Green New Deal in front of Barack Obama or Joe Biden, what I think would happen, you would get it passed, but it would be so watered down. There would be so many concessions made that it would basically not be what progressives consider the Green New Deal. I mean, if you look at Obamacare, Obamacare was the most watered down form of government health care you could get.
Okay, but building off that, though, even if you have, say, Bernie Sanders as the president, and you have to get a bill to him for him to sign, you still have Nancy Pelosi there. You still have the establishment Democrats running the other two chambers. You're going to get the watered down versions of Bernie's policies that he'll sign off on. That's what I'm thinking.
I mean, I really think it depends on the person who's in office. One reason I think people really like Bernie Sanders, and one reason I was drawn to him myself, is he is in some ways similar to one of my favorite presidents, FDR. Now, actually, what I would say, we can get into this slightly later, but what I would say is actually he's shown himself to not be as strong as someone like FDR, because someone like FDR, what he would do, and I'm pretty sure there's strong historical documentation of this, he would bring in people, the main people in his party, the Democratic Party. He would bring them into his office, and he would say, okay, look, you're going to help me pass this legislation, this legislation, this legislation, and that legislation. If you do not, I will put money I will give money to your competitors when you run for re-election, and I will make sure that you do not get reelected. Now, so what I'm trying to say is, if you get the right person who knows how to play politics, I think you could get legislation passed that is certainly not watered down. The Republicans, I must say, they are very good at getting what they want. They are very good at playing politics. And so really what we need, in my view, we need Democrats. We need people on the left who learn from the Republican playbook, who know they don't back down. They don't take no for an answer. They don't take a watered down version of their bill. They are constantly pushing for their goal. They are constantly pushing for their ideal legislation.
I think that raises two thoughts for me. So I do agree with what you're saying in the sense that Bernie Sanders would definitely not have the power to do that kind of he wouldn't have the control of the party itself, because Bernie Sanders to some extent is still on a farther end of the party. So just because he'd be president doesn't mean he'd have the levers of the DNC and who to fund and who not to fund. Now, I mean, he could say that he would potentially support a challenge against an incumbent, but that wouldn't be as successful as Nancy Pelosi, telling the DNC what to do and what not to do. So I agree that he wouldn't be in as strong of a position. Now, I think maybe we don't want to get too caught up in this thought I had, but it does raise the thought to me that if we're going to acknowledge that the way for Democrats to get these big agenda items pushed forward is by, doing these behind the door, threatening people to lose their job unless they get on with the agenda, telling them like you need to play party politics. It's going to be cutthroat. You need to abide by this polarized party line. I feel like that should give you pause to some extent about giving more power to these people if they're going to have to be that cutthroat and attempt to monopolize power in such a way, in such a Machiavellian way. I think that raises alarm bells of, well, why should they have this much power over everybody's life in the first place if it's these people who are clearly dueling for it and these, kind of, I don't know, in some conniving ways threatening each other. And it's not people actually necessarily voting for the policies that they actually think are best. It's people going along to get along. Like, I feel like that sets up for bad policy. So I just want to bring up that concern that raises for me.
What I would say to that is, I mean, I would love to live in a world where, all politicians are all, they're friendly to each other all times, and they're always thinking about everyone's feelings and thoughts, and they're going, and they, and that we live in a world where like you could just do a little bit of change here, a little bit of change there, and just make the world gradually a far better place. But I just don't think we live in a world like that. Politics can be and is, I think by definition, is cutthroat. I just don't see, and this is my issue with Bernie Sanders. He dropped out. Again, his name is still technically on the ballot in some states, or in as far as I know, all the states, or most of them at least. But he dropped out. He said why did he drop out? Well, it's hard to say. I was watching a video of Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk, and he said he thinks Bernie dropped out because he feels guilty for the 2016 election, and he feels like he's responsible for Trump. I can't get into Bernie's mind, but whatever the reason, he dropped out. And now he's gung-ho for Biden. I'm going to do everything I can to get Biden elected. And actually, I think this is a good time. I wanted to bring up an article from Vanity Fair. I don't know if you read that article that I sent you. It is titled, "Bernie Sanders Doesn't Want His Delegates Attacking Biden. on Twitter, and I'll just read a brief part of it, and then I'd like to talk about it. Though Senator Bernie Sanders has officially suspended his presidential campaign, the Vermont senator has made clear that he intends to continue amassing delegates to influence the Democratic platform and push the party further left. But in a sharp shift from 2016, those delegates are expected to be on their best behavior. The Washington Post reports that the Sanders campaign has asked its delegates to sign an agreement regarding their social media use and conduct at the convention, which bars the supporters from making unauthorized comments to the media, confronting people online, and most importantly, attacking other candidates, like former Vice President and presumptive nominee Joe Biden. Okay, so what Bernie is doing is toting the party line. He's saying, okay, he's saying, okay, now I'm going along to get along. I feel bad about Trump. I don't want Trump to get reelected. I'm going to throw my hat in with a establishment 2012 candidate, as you called him, and I'm going to try to force my delegates and my supporters to not criticize Joe Biden, to not try to push him further left, because all we have to do is get Trump out of there. I mean, and this is the crazy thing to me about Donald Trump, is like Donald Trump makes liberals lose their mind. I mean, they literally think that he's like the worst embodiment of all evil, and that they'll do anything pretty much to get him out of office. And I think that's a terrible worldview. I would rather fight for a candidate who agrees with my worldview, who wants to get the policies passed that I get passed, than throw my hat in the ring with Joe Biden just because, Donald Trump's a bad candidate or a bad president. I don't see why that should be the standard.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I mean, I guess one thing I wanted to go back to is everything you explained about Bernie Sanders lining up with the Democratic Party now and telling his delegates not to criticize Joe Biden kind of shows what you were saying Bernie Sanders should hypothetically do if he was president. He should hypothetically be a bully. Well, it sounds like this is what's happening in practice. It's just with the part of the Democratic Party you don't like. The people like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden won. Bernie said, okay, well, I'm still a member of this party and I still want this party to win. So he just did he just put his guys, on notice not to do that. So he is saying we should protect our candidate and we should play politics. And he's essentially, by saying they need to not attack Biden, that's like an implicit, an implicit comment that sheds negative light towards Joe. Well, like he needs to be protected, like he will inherently be criticized if you don't tell them not to. But yeah, it sounds like the Machiavellian strategizing and controlling people in your own party, but it's just for the wing of the party that you don't like, which I just think is kind of funny because we were talking about how Bernie should hypothetically, I guess, utilize similar things if he was in charge of the party. But in this case, it's in the world today, it's the flip side of it. And I think that's how like Nancy Pelosi will dominate it, even though the most enthusiastic part of the party is the progressive activists. Do you want to touch on that before I address the part about compromising on principle? Because I do have thoughts on that.
I mean, I'm not going to say that what Bernie did, I mean, that he's like doing something he shouldn't do. I mean, I don't think well, how do I put it? I'm not saying he can't do that. I mean, obviously, if you talk to, I'm sure if you look at the party, look at the way the party is set up. I'm sure you could probably, some DNC head would, if I talked to them, they would say, okay, here's this, and this, why Bernie is legally allowed to tell his delegates to, pipe down and not criticize Bernie Sanders. And that's fine. And he has the right to do that as a politician and the member of the Democratic Party. I just think it shows that he is not FDR. It shows that he's not. It shows that he has a weakness, and again, his weakness is Donald Trump. It's a right wing populist candidate that is making him compromise his principles. And so, I mean, yeah, again, I don't have any criticism that you're saying he's doing it. He's being Machiavellian in the other direction. Yeah, but I disagree that that's the direction he should be Machiavellian in, and I'm disappointed that he does not have the strength in him to. He did not have the strength in him to continue on campaigning like I think he should have.
Gotcha. And I think we can leave that little, side thoughts there. Now, when you briefly talked about compromising on principle with, everything going around on social media, it's implied that if you were supporting Bernie, you should jump on the Biden bandwagon. And you're essentially saying, why would I make that compromise? I don't like Biden. I'm not a neoliberal. I don't like the past Democratic establishment. I don't really want to give them my vote. So I kind of wanted to build off that a little bit. Fortunately for me, when I come to think about the same kinds of questions, I'm not playing. I mean, I don't think my vote matters anyways. So I don't have to give the thought too much strenuous thinking. But if I was considering only the top two parties as valid, because this is kind of what I thought around 2016. I was more or less a libertarian at that point, although I still wasn't sold on open borders and I wasn't sold on being anti-war. So the obvious choice for me was Trump. But now when I look at it, Biden versus Trump, to me, they seem very similar, except Trump is more protectionist, which I don't like. And then Biden is more open borders, which I do like. But Biden is more likely to be a risk of signing off on large economic stimulus programs or jobs programs, which is a concern. But if I actually was thinking about that and I had to lay out their policies and compare them, I think there's a huge amount of overlap. And the things that Biden might be more liberal on might be the few things that I'm actually more like quote unquote liberal on. So he might actually be the better candidate for all I know. But frankly, I wouldn't see myself voting for either of them this election, or I guess really anybody who's running, because I wouldn't be willing to vote for somebody who I don't feel actually represents me, even if I agree with them more than the other candidate. And I guess what I think a relevant tie-in is the Libertarian just nominated Jo Jorgensen to run for the for the presidency. And she's going to be running with the VP. The VP is going to be Spike Cohen. So they got announced this weekend. And Jo Jorgensen's actually like a pretty extreme libertarian. Like Gary Johnson was very moderate libertarian. Justin Amash looked like he was going to end up being the pick before he dropped out. He was pretty moderate. And Jo Jorgensen's a lot more strict on her, views against government. But I still don't feel like she's a perfect representation of my views, and I still don't feel like voting is very important. So I'm not going to vote for her because my values are generally against implying my consent to the government, and anybody who's not for, I guess, pretty much anarchy. So I'm not going to compromise and vote. But it sounds like you're not willing to vote for Biden over Sanders because he's not a populist, and because he's generally representative of the Democratic establishment views. He's not extreme enough on certain positions, so you're not willing to pick the lesser of two evils. I guess that's what I'm hearing, and you're also not very convinced by the lesser of two evil thinking. Okay, yeah, and I'm behind you, and for you, you're voting in Kentucky, so I guess it doesn't particularly make a ton of difference. It's clearly going to be a red state. Do you have more thoughts on that? I just brain dumped a lot of random thoughts that I had off what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I'm going down my list. So actually, something on my list ties to what you just said. Because something else I wanted to touch on is, as I say, I do have some major disagreements with Bernie Sanders. I think I think he's a moralist, meaning he's kind of concerned with. He's. I think I might have told you this already. He's like a. This sounds like a mean thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. He's almost like a preacher in the pulpit, like preaching like what's right and what's wrong, and you're gonna, you need to do what's right, and you need to stop doing what's wrong, and this society is corrupt, and we need to stop being corrupt. And I think that's a style of argument that I just don't agree with, and I don't think is relevant in the 21st century. And of course, I'm much more anti-capitalist than Bernie is. I think when Bernie was younger, he was a bit more anti-capitalist, but now he's come on the record and said, no, I like capitalism. I just want regulated form of capitalism, which I don't agree with. So why would I support Bernie Sanders at all? Why would I support any candidate at all? Why wouldn't I go with your approach, which is not to consent to vote in a system that I think is corrupt and I don't like? And my answer is based on a strategy that I hear mostly on the left. It might be on the right, but I almost always hear about it on the left, and that's called a united front. So I'm willing, like, Bernie Sanders is one of the closest politicians in the United States to my worldview. Again, it's not exactly my worldview, but it's the closest to my worldview. So would someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Charles Booker, who's running against McConnell in my state, Kentucky, Nina Turner, people like that. Tulsi Gabbard to a slightly less extent. People like that they're the closest thing to, I would say, social democrats in our society. And, social democrats are much closer to my worldview than neoliberal corporatists. And of course, I as I said in the democracy episode, I still think I still think participating in your society is important. I still think fighting for the ideas you believe in, even if it's in a flawed nation state, is important. And so, and this reminds me of, I think there was an essay by Rosa Luxemburg. I think it was Reform. I think it's called Reform or Revolution. I'm finding Social Reform and Revolution, I guess is what it was called. And Rosa Luxemburg, of course, was an Orthodox Marxist, and she was arguing against the more reform kind of socialism that I think, I want to say someone named Bernstein was a proponent of. I don't remember the first name. But Noam Chomsky actually brings up a good point. He says, a lot of revolutionaries are reformists. And I think that's true. I think you almost have to be nihilistic to say, okay, I don't care about any reforms. I don't care about any way to make the plight of the working class or the plight of just people in general better. And so I think that, if we pass things like Medicare for All or Green New Deal, that would make people's lives far better. Again, that's not getting to my perfect society, or that's not getting quite to my goal overall. Not that there is such a thing as a perfect society, but it's making people's lives and just the world overall better. So I don't mind. I would happily vote for Bernie Sanders for that reason. And I guess I would also say, to add one more point, I kind of want to talk a little bit about like Joe Biden and like what cases I would vote for Joe Biden. But I guess I'll let you jump in here, then I can tackle that.
Yeah, and I like how you're going to follow this up, because I think that's part of what I was going to jump in and kind of ask for clarification on. So I do agree that like if a reform happened in my direction, I mean, I'd be happy to hear it, right? Like there are tons of things that could be rolled back, and like even with Trump rolling back a ton of regulations, I was happy to hear those things. I was happy to hear that the individual mandate would stop being enforced when he was president, and that if you just didn't check a box saying if you had health insurance or not, the IRS wouldn't come asking for the penalty. Like all this is good news to me, even though I don't think, even though I wouldn't actively be going out there to vote for him. Now, I guess part of this, but part of the reason why I don't think I'll vote anytime soon, and I think it clarifies why it could be okay for you to compromise and not for me to compromise, is part of my ideology isn't just thinking the state should do X or the state should do X or should do less of X. I pretty much do not believe the state needs to exist, and voting at all reinforces the idea. Voting is participating in the concept of this federal government and the state government. So it's inherently against my values, and the only people who are likely to win would only take it. Will only act in a direction that isn't favorable to me. Because even Trump is, in some ways, is a bigger statist than Biden or Bernie. See borders and trade. Well, him and Bernie are kind of in lockstep on trade, but that's not the point. So it wouldn't make sense for me to vote for Trump because he's not even somewhat working towards my ideology in any capacity. And then I could, do a vote for Jo Jorgensen just to say I voted for her. But I don't see the reason to, make sure I've met all the requirements of the state to take part in a vote just so I can, vote for somebody who has no chance of winning. Not that my individual vote matters in terms of deciding between the main two candidates. So I guess I just want to reiterate that point. So if you are making the claim to not vote for the lesser of two evils, you kind of would have to show how Joe Biden is in no way working towards your ideology. And because you're a proponent of the state and you're willing to defend the state, I feel like saying that you should vote for the lesser of two evils isn't that bad of a thing to hear. Because you're essentially saying if I have to pick between two people to run the state, here's the better of the two. Because if you're not arguing, well, the problem is with the state itself, and I'm not going to participate, I'm not sure. And I know you think your vote matters more than I would say your vote matters, because I think it's just a piece of paper, and elections aren't decided by one, except for very rarely, almost never. So I don't know. You can elaborate on your thoughts about when you would vote for Joe Biden, because I'm interested to hear where you're going to go with that. I'm not sure where you're headed.
I think again, I'm stealing from from Noam Chomsky. I believe in what he termed, although I don't know if he came up with the term, strategic voting. So, as you say, I'm from the state of Kentucky. The state of Kentucky is automatically going to Trump. No matter what I do, I could campaign for Joe Biden all day long, every day until the, election day in my state. It's not going to go to Biden. I could donate, a whole lot of money to Joe Biden. Still not going to go. My state's still not going to go to Joe Biden. But if I lived in a swing state, then I would hold my nose and vote for the lesser of two evils. It wouldn't make me feel good to vote for. It wouldn't have made me feel good to vote for Obama in 2012 or Hillary in 2016, and it wouldn't make me feel good to vote for Biden in 2020. But we live in a system where the votes that matter the most are the swing states, or battleground states, as they're called, because those are the ones that can, as they say, you can go either way. And so it's kind of funny to me. This is a slight aside, but it's like when the people who defend the electoral college say, well, those who are against the electoral college, they don't care about the, poor rural towns in, I don't know, Utah, because the politicians are never going to go to the poor little town in Utah if there's no electoral college. And I only bring this up to say, well, it's like the states that they focus on, though, are the swing states. So there's already states within the system that they focus on, regardless of the electoral college or not. But that's an aside. In a swing state where you have more, where I think your vote matters more, I would vote for the lesser of two evils. But I wouldn't do it because I thought they were going to fight for my policies. And I wouldn't do it because I necessarily even like the candidate, but just because in states like that, I would feel, as I say, that I have more power and influence to, and I don't like, in 2012, I certainly wouldn't have liked Romney. I thought Obama was a little better than Romney. I thought Hillary was a little better than Trump, and I think Biden is a little better than Trump. So it really depends on the situation.
Okay, now, not to sound particularly cynical, but kind of what I'm hearing is, in the off chance that your vote would matter more, like in a swing state, you would be willing to compromise on your values because then your vote actually matters. If your vote doesn't matter, then of course you'll do the principled thing. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
I don't think that's quite what I said.
Well, I know you phrased it in this way that it's all about strategy. You're like, well, if I'm in a swing state, I'll vote for Biden because I'd rather have Biden over Trump. But you're in Kentucky. Your vote for Biden wouldn't mean anything anyways, and it has no chance of remotely swaying the election. So of course you're not going to vote for the guy you don't like. But you're willing to hold your nose when it actually, comes down to the table of like, would your vote maybe matter? Oh, then I'll go vote for the guy who sucks, because he sucks less than the other dude.
I mean, I guess I would put it to you like this. I mean, I think, again, it's almost, it goes back to my point about the united front. I mean, I think for the country and for the world, Biden would be a little better. That doesn't mean he's not. Doesn't mean he's a good candidate. Doesn't mean I like him as a candidate. But I would be willing to vote for him if my vote mattered more, because I would be improving things ever so slightly. Now, again, I want to make big improvements. I want real change to happen. But sometimes, sometimes you have to compromise, and I know that sounds like a moderate position, and I sound like a fence sitter, but I mean, I think it's true. Sometimes you have to lay your chips down and say, okay, in this case, I'm going to go with the lesser of two evils.
Yeah. I guess I was trying to say it in this blunt way because you were kind of, you explained it in a way that made sense. I wasn't trying to say you were wrong for saying it, but when we took out the dressing of you explaining it in the most, not because you can explain things in ways that are very charitable to yourself, and that's fine. I mean, it makes sense to me to think that way. I'm just saying, a very cynical person would have interpreted what you said in the not charitable way, and that way is, well, you're sitting there on principle because your vote's not going to change anything. And when there's the chance your vote might change anything, you're willing to compromise. And I think that's how a lot of politics works. And I think that's why so many people are incrementalists, because they are in positions to where they might think something, and then they're willing to just say, well, we could take this one win here, and then I'll toe the party line because Nancy Pelosi says I get to keep my job if I toe the party line. And that's how you end up with a bunch of establishment Democrats. And I think that's why what happens with a lot of people in the Republican Party is a lot of them get all excited about free market ideas, and they show up there, and then they hear like, yeah, we can do a little bit of that, but the most stuff we're going to do isn't related to that at all, and you better vote with it, or else Mitch McConnell's going to make you lose your job. And I think that's just what happens with Washington in general. And I think that's why it's so easy to hate on the swamp. And that's kind of what was positive about Bernie Sanders' message to a lot of people who are on the far left, is it sounded like he didn't want to get drowned in that swamp.
Well, I mean, as I said, I mean, even I think the hardcore revolutionist is willing to say, if we can do something to moderately improve, the conditions of a country, or do or vote for a person that might, be marginally better in terms of, policies X, Y, and Z. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and it's again, it is a way of playing politics, and it is, I'm not even saying. I guess I could add this. I'm not even saying that my not voting for Biden. I'm not even saying that is a strategy as such. It's just an example, which, my vote matters much less, so I'm not going to bother voting for Joe Biden. That doesn't, I mean, that I'm not going to change the world that way. I'm not going to, it's not like I'm going to avoid voting for Biden or not vote at all or vote for a Green Party candidate. Then, bingo, bango, bongo, everything's going to be, it's going to wake up in paradise. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't mean, I'm sorry if I sound cynical. I don't, I don't think I'm being, self-aggrandizing by saying I'm not being cynical. I'm just trying to play politics as such.
I think what you said made sense. I think a lot of people who are similar to you in terms of thinking would probably agree with that. And I was just putting the cynical spin on it and seeing what you thought of it. Did you have more you wanted to build on situations you'd be willing to vote for Joe Biden before I go on tangents?
Yeah, sure. I would add, it would depend on a couple things. If he nominated a vice presidential candidate who was more to the left than he was, so again, if it were someone like Bernie Sanders or Nina Turner, or, well, Tulsi Gabbard's not old enough, I don't think, to be vice president, but if she were old enough, Tulsi Gabbard, or maybe someone like Andrew Yang, I don't know if he's old enough to be vice president, but if I was confident that at least someone who agreed with my policies was going to be in the room with Joe Biden, I would vote for him, because at least I would know that, well, there's someone there who agrees with me the majority of the time, agrees with me on my core issues, and it wouldn't guarantee that he would listen to them. He probably wouldn't. But at least I would in some sense have a voice in the game. And I even was telling a friend the other day that I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to a Biden-Warren ticket, just because Warren is probably closer to Bernie Sanders in terms of policy than Amy Klobuchar or Kamala Harris, or any of the other centrist candidates that Joe Biden is suggesting he should make VP.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that kind of when you're explaining how it's like at least somebody's in the room to have that to butt into the conversation and give their idea. I think that's funny, because I could see a lot of people making that argument for Trump and Pence, because there were a lot of Christian conservatives that could feel alienated by Trump's personality. But knowing that Mike Pence, the quiet guy who doesn't say anything profoundly offensive, is there to, give his classic conservative, the typical religious conservative remarks, probably did a lot to shore up that base for Trump. And I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that in their analysis of the election. And that would make a lot of sense in terms of, a VP pick being reassuring. Now, I see Joe Biden going the Kamala Harris route. That seems most likely to me, given that she's, he already said he's going to pick a woman, and then she's a woman of color, and she's pretty moderate in terms of like establishment Democrats. So I don't see who else he'd really pick at this point. I know they've kind of who's that Georgia governor? I don't know if you remember her, the woman who ran for governor in Georgia and lost, and then she keeps saying it's been stolen from her, and she's been saying this for like 3 years now. She keeps essentially trying out for the VP. She's terrible. It's Stacey Abrams. Yeah, so I hope she doesn't. But I think Kamala Harris is most likely. If I bet money on it, it'd be her. So it doesn't seem like he's going to, pick an Elizabeth Warren type.
No, I think Kamala Harris. Maybe I think Amy Klobuchar has a chance. But you're probably right. I would say Kamala Harris probably has a greater chance. So that's why I will most likely 99% not be voting for Joe Biden in the 2020 election. And actually, if I can add one more point, I've noticed that a lot of liberals look down on the people who say never Biden. Well, and that actually isn't me. I wouldn't say never Biden, but they look down on the people who aren't willing to vote for Biden, of the people on the left who aren't willing to vote for Biden, and they say, what's your problem? Trump is is such a terrible president. It goes back to the lesser of two evils argument. As long as we can get a president who's a little better, that's you should almost certainly vote for Joe Biden, and a vote for no vote at all, or a vote for a third party candidate's a vote for Trump. And you should feel bad if you don't vote for Joe Biden. And I just want to say to, any liberals watching, or any liberals listening or watching that, make those arguments like that, I really don't understand how you come to that place. Why should I feel bad if I don't vote for Joe Biden and Donald Trump wins, supposedly? Now, I'm actually thinking it's a bit more 50-50 at this point due to the pandemic. But supposing, I don't vote for Joe Biden and Donald Trump wins, why is that my fault? Why should I lay awake at night feeling bad? Oh my gosh, I didn't vote for Biden. Now we have 4 more years of Trump. I'm going to go cry myself to sleep at night. I mean, I'm going to, in this case, when a vote for Joe Biden in Kentucky really means nothing at all, I think I have the right to say, okay, then I'm just not going to vote for him. I just don't feel comfortable doing that in my circumstances. If I were in slightly different circumstances, I would hold my nose and vote for the guy, but I'm not in those circumstances. And I think people do quite often what is called voter shaming. Like, oh, if you voted for this person, you're a bad person. If you vote for this person, you're a good person. And really, people should not do that. I honestly don't care who a particular person votes for. I know I care about who I vote for. And yeah, I would prefer if people didn't vote for Trump, but I'm not going to sit there and wag my finger and be like, oh, you should feel bad because you voted for Donald Trump, or you should feel bad because you didn't vote for Joe Biden. People have the right to vote for who they want to vote for. And it's just an example where I don't feel that I don't think that Joe Biden really cares at all about most of my policies that I care about. So why should I vote for him?
Okay, I have a few thoughts on that. So I can totally understand why somebody would would shame somebody for not voting Joe Biden. And I'm not saying it's because I like Joe Biden. I'm just saying like I could get their perspective.
Oh,
So
no, I get their perspective. I just disagree with it.
Oh, okay. Well, I disagree with it because I don't like Joe Biden. I'm okay with people shaming people for their votes. It's kind of like how I'm okay with people shaming other people for saying things I don't like. It's like, sure, you have the right to say it, but I can shame you for it. To some extent, I shame anybody who votes because I think it's silly. And I'm more than happy to shame people for voting for people who want to take away my rights. And I think that's an important part of the process. If somebody votes for somebody who you think is really ridiculous, I mean, I wouldn't go up to somebody and say, "Hey, you're an idiot," because that's a bad way of communicating with people, and it's not persuasive. But I'm okay with shaming people to be like, well, like I get why you would make the trade-off for universal health care. You're okay with paying more taxes so your health care is covered. But not everybody's willing to make that trade-off, and you're imposing it on me, and that's violence. And like you voted for a guy who wants to do violence to me, and like maybe you should second guess that. And to some extent, that's voter shaming. I'm telling you shouldn't vote for that person because he's going to inflict violence on me, and that's how I feel. So I'm totally fine with people saying, making their case. You just find it completely unpersuasive, and those people are typically rabid. So of course you find their communication techniques abhorrent because a lot of them are silly and live in a bubble, and they can't empathize with anybody who could possibly disagree with them. So of course they overreact to the fact that you have hesitancy towards a moderate neoliberal. You know, but
Boo.
yeah, right. But so I guess what I'm saying is I agree those people are dumb and annoying. But I'm gung ho for voter shaming, unironically, like totally double down on that. You should be able to hate on people for really anything.
Oh, well, no. Let me make myself clear. I don't care. I mean, I don't care one way or the other. If you voter shame, I'm not going to take you seriously, and I'm going to ignore you. Like if someone's voter shaming me for not voting for Joe Biden, I'm just going to ignore you. You can do it. You can do it all you want. I'm just going to ignore you.
Well,
I'm not going to take you seriously because you're not willing to have a conversation about, okay, why did you vote for Joe Biden? Because that's what I'm saying. And I just don't agree with the idea of good people, bad people anyway. And that's a whole other philosophical discussion we can get into in another day. But if you're not willing to sit down with someone and say, okay, I just want to know your perspective. Like Trump supporters, I think I know why people voted for Trump. I disagree with it, but I'm willing to talk to people who vote for Trump and say, okay, I'm listening to you and I see what you're saying and I disagree with you. And I just think if I were a Trump supporter and someone was shaming me for voting Trump, I would just ignore them. I would say, okay, go away. I don't care.
I think that the whole like attacking people over who they voted for in such a belligerent manner is actually I think it's why I've always had such a negative instinct towards protests in general. And this is something I've been very conflicted on as of late because I feel like when you're so marginalized by both political parties in the country, the only thing there really is to do is to protest. But I've never witnessed a protest that's existence didn't annoy me. Because every time I see a protest, I'm like, can you guys just like shut up and stop blocking the street? Like you can have a point, but you're now obstructing everybody's day, and now everybody is predisposed to be annoyed with you as you try to communicate a message that you find important. And as a person who finds every message of liberty in the 21st century, seemingly it seems non-existent for the most part. Nobody's out there saying, give me more freedom to do more of what I want with my own money. Please don't control my life. Nobody's out there saying that. And I feel like people should be out there on the streets making that argument. But it's just like those vote shamers. They're so obnoxious. I don't want to see a bunch of people with these annoying signs being loud, disrupting lives. So I'm actually been very conflicted over this recently because I'm a podcaster who I'm a big fan of, and she has a very small podcast. Well, I'm assuming it's small. I guess it's all relative. It's obviously much larger than ours. But to some extent, she has been proposing the idea of a 4th of July march on Washington. And she's been for that idea since a little bit before the pandemic anyways. But it's especially against all these massive stimulus packages where the votes aren't even on record. And it's like, I find these votes completely disgusting. But have I ever been persuaded by a protest a single time? And the answer is I've never been convinced by them. So do I actually think that there's any utility of participating? I'm not sure.
Wait, can I that brings up a quick question I just want to ask you.
Yeah, go for it.
So is your point that, is it just kind of you're saying like, oh, freedom of speech, you have the right to voter shame all you want, but you're also saying, well, I've never been persuaded by a vote shamers. So I'm a
Well,
bit confused by your point about
I
vote shaming.
I was saying that most people who vote shame are also belligerent and rabid about it. So their belligerent and their rabid attitude is most likely to make it so you observe them in a negative light. I don't think that's inherent to vote shaming, though, which is why I kind of didn't want to jump against vote shaming. Because I think you can calmly explain to somebody why voting for Joe Biden or Trump is a very bad thing to do for a slew of reasons. And that's fine, and it could be persuasive. But if you go in there saying, if you're not willing to suck it up and vote for Joe Biden, you're the trash that's keeping our country evil, then it's like, well, nobody's ever going to listen to you ever. So, yeah. Sorry, I think that clarifies what you're asking. Did you have opinions on people protesting in general, on the utility of it? I could see the utility of it when there were things like, obvious racism in society. But now that it's like all the biggest protests typically are a cop did something bad, it's arguably racist, so there's a riot. And I feel like you're just hyping up both camps whenever those riots happen, and there's no utility of it. It just makes the right wingers go, look, they're all criminals. They're burglarizing things during this riot. And then the left wing people are like, well, there was murder. What do you expect? And then there's nothing to be gained nowadays.
I mean, this kind of ties back into the Rosa Luxemburg essay I was talking about, Reformer Revolution. Can there be instances, as you say, like back when there was racism, was protesting against that? Was that justified, and was that in some ways helpful? Yeah, I think that was. If we're protesting about, I don't know, something Trump tweeted, is that it? Or if we're protesting about the fact that he goes golfing, is that going to do anything? Is that really even an issue? No. And if you protest over things like that, then you're just being silly.
Well, it's not even that. It's just like the perceived, the perception of some people of the obvious racism in society back then was like, it's so blatantly unjust what was going on then that I think that there's a case to be made that the protests and the civil disobedience would be observed by like an average person in a positive light. It's like, oh my God, the cops are arresting them for just saying this simple thing. Oh my God. But I feel like now people will say income inequality is abhorrent, but then it's like, okay, but you're making it so nobody can, drive through the city, and it's ruining everybody's day. And like, I think taxes are completely disgusting. And like the fact that for my whole life, probably a third of my income will be stolen from me is like, wow, that's ridiculous in my mind. But the average person who's gone to public school and is raised in the Republican Democrat paradigm will not think that's abhorrent. So me protesting is just going to be like, well, look at this nut. He's being annoying. He's blocking stuff off. For that, of all things, get over it. It's like, how's there any utility to that? And I think I'm okay at making the case when I talk to people in a one-on-one setting or just amongst, small groups of people. I'm somewhat persuasive. But it's not going to work in terms of protests. But yeah, I know that's completely unrelated to what we were talking about. It just came to mind. It's always something that's bugged me is when I've seen those and it's screwed up my day. I'm like, come on, guys. Did you have to block traffic to get that message out there?
I mean, you could have said, to slightly play devil's advocate, I don't know if we want to harp on this forever, but I mean, you could have said the same thing about the civil rights protesters. Well, you're blocking the road. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. I'm not saying that's what you're saying. That's a thought that just popped into my head. I mean, it really depends again on what's going on. I mean, I'm not. I mean, you already said something to get the government to start spying on you. So I'll say something right now to start getting the government to spy on me. I think there's you can have a actual philosophical conversation about if revolution is justified. And so, protesting, that can be part of a revolution. So is there? I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a place for direct action? Are there times when you can just say, okay, I'm done, campaigning. I'm done trying to get the legislator to do what I want. I'm just gonna go out in the street and protest, and I'm just going to try to secede from the government, or going to try to create my own country, or or just completely flip the government on its head and create a whole new one. Yeah, I think there's there's definitely a way you can justify that.
I think you're right. I agree. There are times where direct disobedience is more than justified, especially I think you at least have the hope that there are some inklings that a major party could potentially have a wing of it go in the direction that you agree with. And I'm just sitting here like, dude, nobody's out there representing me. It's like kind of Thomas Massey, kind of. That's it.
I mean, I'm kind of like, I'm slowly, like, I'm becoming more and more, I'm getting more and more to where I'm more sympathetic to your viewpoint, but I haven't quite given up the idea that campaigning and actually getting involved in the system will do something. But I'm becoming I will say, incredibly disillusioned, and I'm getting to the point, which I haven't quite gotten to, but I'm slowly getting to the point where I'm gonna just be done with the Democratic Party. And it's like, part of me is like, I almost want to start trying to get the Democratic Party to just stop existing.
I have like a handful of somewhat related thoughts before we wrap up, because we are pushing up against time. So I was going to say, I thought I did have you starting to get more sympathetic to me the last few weeks. And then, like, you lead this episode by being like, yeah, Joe Biden's just not for the Green New Deal, and he's not a protectionist enough, and he doesn't like the free trade agreements. I mean, he's too nice to free trade agreements, so I don't think I like him. And I'm like, dude, did I miss something? Was I not persuasive about the virtues of freedom and how I should be allowed to, trade with somebody in a different country without being worried about the federal government coming in and slapping taxes on it just because they're not the right business? So we might have to revisit a couple things, and then at least get both sides of it. So maybe I could see why you're for it, because as far as I know, the Green New Deal and the concept of it, I don't think it's particularly defensible, except in theory of saying if it's something that's remotely good for the environment, maybe. But I might have some stuff to push back on there. So we might want to touch on that in a future week. And then the other thing I want to add, because you said you're starting to lose hope in democracy, is every time I see something stupid on the internet now, I immediately think that person can cancel out my vote. Why? This is the problem with democracy. You can read like 200 tweets that are like regurgitating talking points, and this person has no real thoughts beyond the programming they've received from their education, their parents, and the media. And then just like, okay, these are the people who are voting. How do you have faith in a system that's based around this? So, I'm glad that you're starting to see that and maybe getting some of the frustration too, because every person who voter shames you is a firm believer in democracy when it goes their way. And that's what democracy is. And then the last thing, did I have a last thing? I think that's it. So if you want to do a final word on that, feel free. If not, we can wrap up.
Yeah, though I have 2 quick points, and then we can close it down for the day. So, first point, again, that kind of goes back to another point I made earlier today about the United Front. I'm willing to go along with social democrats like Bernie Sanders. I'm willing to use the power of the state that we currently live under. I'm willing to play politics enough to improve the lives of people overall. That doesn't mean I've given up my. That doesn't mean I've given up my Marxist anarchist tendencies. I was thinking about this the other day. I wish there was something I might write I'm kind of been like doing a little writing about this on my own. Like, I wonder if Someone should come up with the term anarcho-Marxist, but that's a conversation for another time. And the second point, it's not democracy that I've become disillusioned about. It's the democracy. It's the form of democracy that we have. It's the republic that we have in the United States. I still hold by my democratic principles, and I don't think that the United States is democratic enough. And I think I think there's too much involvement with money in the system. I think too many people, libertarians, Green Party, the farther to the left, people farther to the left in the Democratic Party. There isn't enough enfranchisement. It's not. I have not become disillusioned with democracy, but I become disillusioned with the form of democracy that we have, the two-party system, constitutional democracy that we have, in a phrase, a republic in the United States.
Well, it sounds like I have a lot of work to do in terms of reprogramming you and getting you on the train. And I definitely do want to delve into certain things like anarcho-communism and how you would differentiate your ideal of anarcho-Marxism from anarcho-communism. And then I do want to ask the classic question of when the workers vote 55-45 against something and the 45 don't like what the other workers had to do you throw them in the gulags or what? Because that's still my question, and that to me that's still the differentiator between anarcho-capitalism and everything else. But we won't dig into that now. And I'm just as disillusioned. I'm more disillusioned with everything to the point where I'm ready to. I need to find out the agora, and I need to practice counter economics, and I need to stop funding the state with my transactions because the odds are I'm going to go purchase a disgusting meal at McDonald's after this, and the state will get 30 cents even though they did nothing. And so I got to find the agora, and I need to get off the grid at some point.
I think it's time. You've been free long enough. I think it's time you spend 30 years in the gulag to.
Yeah.
So you learn to appreciate Comrade Stalin and all his ideas.
Sometimes it just be like that, Okay, on that note, thank you for listening to episode 15 of Beyond Talking Points. I hope that was interesting food for thought. We're going to be back with a lot of discussion on some of the policies we touched on today, and maybe ranting about a lot of other topics we have on deck. So be on the watch for those. You could find the video version of the podcast on YouTube if you type in the Anti-Philosopher. You'll find Matt's, I guess he's Matthew, not Matt. You can find Matthew's YouTube channel. And you can find this podcast on any podcatcher. Just search Beyond Talking Points, which is presumably how you found this podcast in the first place. With that said, everybody, hope you enjoyed, and peace.